Do you want to know how to get oven spring like this? Let me show you how to get that incredible oven spring with just 4 tips. In this video, I'm going to bake a loaf from start to finish using these tips so that you can see what a difference they make. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Lydia, and if you have ever opened the oven to see a dense, flat loaf of sourdough, do not worry. I have been where you are, and I'm here to help. After baking seemingly millions of loaves, I have learned 4 key lessons to get that tall oven spring that we all want. Tip number 1 is to use your starter at the right time. Using your starter with correct timing will make all the difference in your bread. Everything about your final loaf really does start at the very beginning, before you've even made your dough. You want to use your starter when it hits the peak point, or right after the peak point. This is when the starter has eaten up all the food that you have already given it by feeding it the flour, so it is at its strongest point. If you do not use the starter, it has no more food to eat, so it will simply fall back down. You will know that your starter is at its peak point when it has more than doubled in size, is very bubbly all around, and is slightly doming on the top. When you see these signs, you are ready to use your active starter. If you use the starter before it reaches its peak, the yeast has not finished growing yet, so your bread will most likely not have as great of a rise as you'd like it to. It's not that the dough won't work at all. In fact, it usually will, but you'll need to give it extra time to ferment, and even then, the texture and the flavor may not be as well balanced, and the oven spring will most likely not be as dramatic and big. If you use your starter after it hits peak point, the yeast will already be running out of food, which means it won't have the same strength to give you the tall oven rise that you want. At this stage, the starter begins to collapse. It begins making more acid than gas because the yeast, which is the driver of carbon dioxide, has used up all of its food, so its activity slows down. The bacteria, however, produces the acid, so they begin to take over, which gives you a more acidic and sharper flavor. So while it may still ferment your dough, the rise will usually be weaker and the flavor of the dough will be noticeably more sour. The resulting bread often has a tighter, denser crumb and less oven spring, since the yeast isn't as active anymore. Genevieve is getting close to her peak point. If you're making a loaf with me, go ahead and mix together 300 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour, 200 grams of bread flour, and 370 grams of room temperature water. Let that autolyse for half an hour. If you want to know more about what autolysing is, watch this video next, which explains it in detail. I will also put it in the description so you can find it afterwards. After half an hour, add 100 grams of starter at its peak point and 10 grams of salt. Lift and fold 4 times, each a half an hour apart. While our dough is fermenting, let's talk about the next tip and my biggest mistake when making sourdough bread. Tip number 2 is without a doubt the one that I am most guilty of. This would be to not over ferment your dough. At this point, we've done all our lift and folds and are just waiting for the dough to grow and become bubbly. I used to think that the dough was so nice and airy when I let it ferment for several hours. Why wouldn't I want it to be more airy? So I started letting my dough ferment for up to 10 or 12 hours after the lift and folds were already done. For reference, unless you live in the actual Arctic or use 1 gram for the starter inoculation, that is way too long for the dough to ferment. It took me way too long to realize that this was the reason that my dough was really sticky and was absolutely refusing to hold its shape. It was incredibly hard to work with and was impossible to shape with my hands or a bench scraper. Not only this, but because I was waiting so long to shape my bread, the yeast activity had already peaked. That would mean then that by the time I was putting the dough in the oven, the yeast activity had already started slowing down. So the hardest lesson for me to learn was to not let my dough rise too long just because it looks super airy and light. I hope you learn from me and shape your dough when it is ready to be shaped instead of waiting too long. The signs that you want to look for are that your dough has risen 25 to 50%, it is pulling away from the edges of your bowl, and it has produced bubbles on the sides and on the top of your dough. If you are having trouble with your oven spring, reduce your bulk rise phase and keep an eye out for the signs from your dough that it is ready to be shaped. If the timing for fermenting and just making sourdough in general confuses you, don't worry. You can download my free sourdough schedules that are linked in the description. There are 3 different schedules, so no matter if you're an early bird or a night owl, I've made a sourdough schedule just for you. Now that our dough looks ready to shape, let's move on to tip number 3. Tip number 3 is to get a good seal on your loaves when shaping. If you do not seal your dough and shape it correctly, you will not get the proper tension on the outside of the dough. Let's pre-shape our dough while we talk about the importance of proper shaping. If your dough does not get the tension that it needs on the surface, it will actually spread out instead of rising up in the oven. Shaping is not easy. It definitely takes practice, but in time, you can build that skill and be consistent with shaping your loaves. You want to create tension for your dough. So whether you do that by moving it forwards and backwards while turning it with a bench scraper, or by twisting it downwards with just your hands, you need to get it to a point where you see that your dough is tight. After letting your dough rest for half an hour, flour the top of your dough and bench scraper to get ready to flip your dough for the final shaping. Make sure to not use too much flour, however, and keep it away from the bottom of your dough so it will remain sticky while doing the final shaping. While making sure to get that good tight seal on the loaf, make sure to not overwork it, causing it to tear. I know it seems as if there are a million rules, but just pay attention to how your dough feels. If it feels tight and has tension, stop working it. After shaping the dough, I'm going to put it in my floured banneton and place it in the fridge overnight. On to tip number 4, which is to score your bread well. It's the next day, so preheat your oven to 450 degrees with the Dutch oven inside for 45 minutes to an hour. When the Dutch oven is almost ready, get your dough out of the fridge, place it on parchment paper, and get ready to score it. Having a proper scoring on your dough allows the gases and steam to escape through the proper channel. If you do not score your loaf, your dough will end up bursting open at random spots and random air bubbles will form inside of your loaf. So this is definitely a skill that you want to master. You want to have a smooth score to get a nice ear for your dough. The ear is the part of the dough that springs up further than the rest of the dough and becomes crispy and charred. You also want to make sure that you score not too shallow and not too deep. Aim for about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep incision when you slice. Make sure to slice at an angle so it is not perpendicular to the loaf, but rather slanted. Do your best to score in one motion, but sometimes the razor gets stuck and that is okay. Just keep going and do your best to finish the motion off. Make sure to use a sharp blade when scoring your bread. There are lots of different ways to score your bread and a million different patterns and designs, but at the end of the day, one score, one slash through your dough will be more than enough and will work wonderfully to help direct the gases and the steam out of your loaf. Let's bake this loaf for 20 minutes at 450 degrees and then remove the lid and bake for 10 more minutes uncovered at 400 degrees. There is the oven spring that we wanted. It is beautiful. That is the perfect crumb. Using these 4 tips just gave us an amazing loaf of sourdough bread. Please give them a try and let me know what you think in the comments. If you would like more guidance on the whole process, no worries. Watch this video where I make a whole loaf with you step by step while breaking down common sourdough mistakes. Thank you for watching. Make sure to download the free sourdough schedule guides in the description, and I will see you next time.